Strange Shadows, a Clark Ashton Smith podcast.
Man's conquest of the interplanetary gulfs has been fraught with many tragedies. Vessel after vessel, like venturous motes, disappeared in the infinite and had not returned. Inevitably, for the most part, the lost explorers have left no record of their fate. Their ships have flared as unknown meteors through the atmosphere of the further planets to fall like shapeless metal cinders on a never-visited terrain, or have become the dead, frozen satellites of other worlds or moons. A few, perhaps, among the unreturning flyers have succeeded in landing somewhere, and their crews have perished immediately or survived for a little while amid the inconceivably hostile environment of a cosmos not designed for men.
Greetings, friends, and welcome to Season 3, Episode 24 of Strange Shadows, the Clark Ashton Smith podcast. The voice you just heard was author James Lovegrove reading the opening of today's story. I'm one of your hosts, Rob Poynton.
And I'm the other one, Tim Mendes. Yes, today we're going to be looking at God of the Asteroid, which is one of Smith's science fiction stories. And we also have a guest joining us from across the pond. Will you all please welcome Mr. David D. Perlmutter.
Hello. How are you, sir?
Hi, David. How are you doing? Welcome back, sir, because you have joined us before, of course.
Yes, I'm very glad to be back here, especially for a wonderful short story that has a lot to draw from it, especially considering the early date it's published.
Yes, very true. I think this is one of his best science fiction stories, alongside the Mars ones, I think.
Yeah.
But before we get into all that interstellar goodness, we've got a couple of things we'd like to remind you of. The first, of course, is this year's Innsmouth Literary Festival. It's taking place September the 27th. Same venue, the King in Yellow's House Centre in Bedford. I'll put the link in the show notes below. We'd love to see you there. We've already got a stellar lineup of guests, and Innsmouth After Dark has just all been confirmed. We've got some readings and I believe a screening this year.
Indeed, yeah. We're going to have a performance of H.P. Lovecraft's From Beyond by Edwardian Tales, and Deadbolt Films will be showing two of their shorts and doing a short Q&A with the audience as well. And our headline act for the evening is none other than Mr. Paul Rowland doing a solo acoustic set.
Nice one. And we're looking to expand into the Sunday as well with an extended RPG session at the local games store. So do take a look at that. And as I say, we hope to see you there. And remember, if you're a patron of the show, of course, you get free entry. Just drop us a line. Let us know that you're coming. Now, speaking of conventions, you've just wrapped your own convention this weekend, I believe.
Indeed, yeah. I was one of the co-organisers of TerratoCon, which was for monster lovers. And it was held in Bristol at the Future Inn. And yeah, due to one thing or another, I ended up on 5 panels. So it was a very hectic but very, very good weekend. So thank you to anybody who attended and who put up with me waffling for 5 hours.
Oh, I know what that's like.
Exactly. Talk about failing your SAN roll, being stuck in a room with me talking at you for 5 hours. That'll do it.
All right, so let's get into the story. Shall we start with our favourite words? David, do you want to lead us off? What did you pick out from this one?
Well, I didn't have like a word, like I learned a new word, but I did like his use of, I guess, reference words, and specifically selenite, because the spaceship that the 3 men originally escaped from Mars to go to the asteroid, or I don't think that's their original intention as much, is the selenite, which, for those of you who really have an old memory, H.G. Wells' First Men on the Moon, they go to the moon. Mr. Caver invents caverite, which apparently blocks gravity, and British gentlemen, as they did before the fall of the empire, traveled to the moon and met insect-like creatures there who they called the selenites. So I thought that was a direct reference, not only in the types of creatures, but of course the spaceship with the name, although I don't think the moon is ever mentioned in the story because the story starts on Mars.
Yeah.
Although, interestingly enough, I did find out, well, selenite is a crystal of the mineral gypsum.
Yes.
And one of the Mars explorers did find deposits of gypsum on Mars. Obviously, that was way after Smith's time. And of course, the name Selene, it refers to the moon as well. So there's lots of connections there, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, selenite is also used in crystal healing because it's supposed to promote spiritual purity.
And that's a reference to the end of the story a little bit, I think. So we can talk about that. But so there's a lot of things to unpack from selenite. Yes.
Yeah, my first one is cryptogamous, which is a plant with no true flowers or seeds, which includes ferns, mosses, liverworts, and lichens.
Nice. I chose a word that I knew the meaning of because it's quite obvious, but I just like the sound of it. Pestiferous.
Nice.
Which is carrying disease, effectively. Pestiferous.
My gran used to use that as an insult. She used to call me a pestiferous nuisance.
Oh, really?
Yeah. My aunties did as well. It must have been one of those words that was used in sort of wartime kind of thing.
Yeah, that's excellent.
Pestiferous Herbert was what I got called a lot.
Pestiferous Herbert.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's exactly how it was said.
Again, I didn't have really mystery words, but I did like some phrases. Like he talked about the serrate peaks, which I gave an impression of sort of geological layers. Like I know this is true in England, but if you come to parts of the United States, including ones I'm in, you can see the billions of years of deposition of sediment and rock that fall into certain ages. And I thought that was a reference to that.
Yeah.
Yeah, my next one it's a genus of insect, phasmidae, which basically means stick insects and leaf insects. It refers to creatures that are basically camouflaged. So I like that as a word, phasmidae,
Yeah, I had to look that one up as well. I had an inkling that that's what it would be.
I knew what it was. I used to breed stick insects for a local pet shop when I was a teenager. So I knew what it was. But I was like, oh, you don't see that in very often.
And the last one for me, well, going back to David's idea of the phrase, was venturous mote that we hear in that opening there. The idea of this spacecraft as a venturous mote, a tiny, tiny speck of dust flinging itself out into the vast cosmos. I thought that was very evocative.
Yeah, I have just one more. It's one we've possibly had on the show before, but it's one that I like immensely. Animadversions, which is criticism or censure.
Okie doke. So, what's the publication history, sir?
Righty-ho. Well, this story was completed on June the 9th, 1932, and was pretty much immediately snapped up for publication by Gernsback's Wonder Stories, where it was published under the title Master of the Asteroid. Now, this change was actually made without Smith's knowledge, which is something Gernsback had an annoying habit of doing, apparently. Various authors had their story titles changed without a single word from Gernsback. He would just do it. And the first they know about it is when they pick up the publication and go, hang on a minute, that's not what I called it.
It's a bit presumptive, isn't it?
Yeah, so why? What I don't understand, considering how the story turns out and how the guy is treated, why would you change it from God? It makes no sense.
Yes, I think this brings up. I guess we're going from the same source here. My source is mainly some letters, and then the fantastic Nightshade editions, the curated editions of the stories. And a synopsis titled "The God of the Asteroid" was found among Smith's papers. Quote: "A spaceship manned by 3 terrestrial explorers is wrecked on an asteroid. One of the 3 survives and is worshipped as a god by the grotesque inhabitants." I like that Smith needs to remind himself, make them grotesque. Because how would they not? I mean, in a Smith story, right? Did he have to like remind himself to do that, or just comes naturally? Anyway, the astronaut goes stark mad, but lives for years, still revered and tended as a deity. So we are very familiar in the world of science fiction with the God Gambit, right? I'm actually using a phrase from Larry Niven, Ringworld,
Yeah.
where they land on the gigantic alien structure, which is another famous trope of science fiction. And people who are less technologically advanced, and this is coming directly from an Arthur C. Clarke quote, so we're throwing references here pretty quickly, sorry, where any sufficiently advanced technology can look like magic to people who don't understand it. So in Larry Niven's Ringworld, the explorers land on Ringworld, and sometimes they decide to play God, to pretend to be God. And then you can go back in time to Rudyard Kipling, the man who would be king, the men who would be king, pretending to be God. So I was interested, and I guess somebody has probably written something, I couldn't find it, on like how long has the God Gambit? I guess the God Gambit has probably been around hundreds of thousands of years.
But this is why I don't understand the name change, because he's not the master of the asteroid. He has no agency whatsoever, but he is worshipped as a god. So why Gernsback changed it from god to master makes zero sense.
Do you think it was for religious sensitivities, maybe, perhaps?
That's the only thing I can think of why he would possibly do that. I mean,
but there's nothing here that makes the protagonist a sort of a savior-like figure or a Christ-like figure or anything, is there?
No, it's very strange. But Smith allowed it to be reprinted as Master in the Derleth curated anthology Strange Ports of Call. And now it's believed that the reason he did that is because it was quite well-known story, so it made sense, right? So yeah, it was reprinted as Master several times. But as David said, the original title dates back to late 1929. And it was from a list of potential story titles that he later wrote synopses for. He was paid $40 for the story in the end.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah.
It's not a hugely long story, is it?
No. I imagine he had to wait. This is Hugo the Rat.
Back, yeah.
So, yeah, there you go.
Did you feel that this felt like the notes for a much longer story? Because at times I'm thinking, boy, you could have developed this plot further. In the H.G. Wells story, they go to the moon and their spaceship is, I guess, captured, and they go meet the master of the god, the leaders of these insect people, the equivalent of queens or kings. And there's a lot is developed. But here it just stuff happens for a little bit and then it's cut short. And I'm not going to challenge Clark Ashton Smith's artistic choices, but it seemed almost rushed. And indeed, the protagonist of the story, except struggling to keep the ship afloat and then not die, rationing his food, doesn't really play a very active role. That's why Master and God seem odd, because he's really plays a very, very passive role. Almost everybody else in the entire story, man and alien, do something. He just sort of reacts.
I think a lot of that is down to the epistolary style, because I've written stories in the epistolary style. It's if you're doing something as diary entries, you've got to try and keep them as diary entries, and diary entries tend to be quite short and to the point. You're not going to start waxing lyrical about a speck of dew on the out porthole window, or the light shining through, because that's kind of unbelievable in a way. So epistolary stories always to me seem a bit bare bones, and I think that's just down to the format. But yeah, there is a lot of places he could have gone with it. But I think some of the fact that it feels quite skeletal is due to the style, in my opinion.
I think as well, I wonder if CAS, I don't want to say he was churning out stories, because that's not true at all. Obviously, he was a very fine craftsman.
Yeah.
But he was putting out stories to get paid, to pay the bills. And obviously, his pecuniary depletion was an influence in that. So it would have been nice if Smith could have earned enough money to kick back for a while and say, I'm going to write a novel.
Yeah.
And to see, then you do get the feeling a story like this could have been the skeleton of a much longer piece, perhaps.
Yeah.
Which, let's face it, very few of them did. Lovecraft, Robert E. Howard, maybe one novella each is pretty much it. Hour of the Dragon, and I suppose At the Mountains of Madness. Maybe Charles Dexter Ward.
Oh no, Charles Dexter Ward is his longest work.
That's the longest.
So, yeah.
So I wonder as well if neither of them really felt, or none of them felt they had the opportunity to stretch out. Everything was, oh shit, I need $30.
Yeah. Well, it was something I did. Like, to begin with, I was knocking out short stories at an alarming rate just because I was trying to get stuff out there and get some money. I was out of work, and it was kind of like, right, well, if I'm going to make some money out of this, I'm going to have to write some stuff. So I was just writing, and it was all short pieces, which I've later gone back and expanded some of. Because I guess that is a factor, So I guess if you put the two things together, the pecuniary depletion and the style of the story being, by its nature, quite, a bit of brevity involved, you're going to get a story that feels a little bit not fleshed out.
Yeah.
We were talking last time about George Orwell in Keep the Apodistra Flying, talks about how you really have to be middle class to be an artist. You have to be supported to do art the way you want to do. But for most of history, I think even through today, artists are forced by economic exigencies to produce what they do within the glory of their art. I mean, there's obviously a lot of great art produced by poor people and in tough circumstances. But yeah, like the decision to write a novel or a novella or 10 short stories, just the economics of it. Like, if you wrote a novel and it was unsuccessful, you might get paid nothing.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
But if you wrote 10 short stories and you just kept submitting them and you sold them for $40 each, well, I mean, that keeps you going. And I think anyone who's been listening to this podcast or knows anything about Smith knows that this was a man who never was in really secure economic circumstances. He was working as a gardener, as a day laborer.
Precisely.
He just, his whole life, he had to do hard physical labor on his farm, and then just a cabin with a few acres there in Auburn. So he never really had the choice. In fact, isn't the theory that he sort of abandoned short stories because he just wasn't making enough, and his little sculptures would make him more and were easier to do, and the day laborer work was getting him more money?
Pretty much, I think that and the death of Howard and Lovecraft hit him quite hard. So I think a combination of those things. Yeah, but it's very true. It's something we speak about a lot, isn't it? This struggle between art and commerce. And two M words, Mozart and Michelangelo, both working to commission.
Yes.
For virtually their entire careers. If Mozart can't make it, then what the fuck have we got?
Yeah.
And we today we create this sort of narrative that if you have a fantastic talent, it'll find financing, but that's never necessarily been true in history. A lot of the people today who earn billions, let's put it that way, never did. And I mentioned last time that it was a really excellent book everybody should read. If you want to learn about Michelangelo, a book called Michael Baxendale, Painting and Experience, and I'm blanking now, 15th century, the Quattrocento, that all the artists back then worked on contract. You didn't sit in a studio for weeks waiting for the muse to hit you. A merchant came and said, look, paint my wife. I want 4 pounds of gold leaf. She's got to be behind with my gigantic estate that I just bought that I want to show off to my friends. They were extremely prescriptive about what they wanted in the art. And of course, great artists, Clark Ashton Smith, Michelangelo, could still create great art within these constrictions. But the idea that they just created whatever they wanted with nothing interfering is, I guess, a modern myth.
Straight away, as we see with this, the title's changed already.
Yeah, exactly.
So I think the first thing that struck me with this story was how space travel, particularly at this time, was quite a romantic thing. But this is the grim reality, isn't it? As we said, these venturous motes going out, and in 99% of the cases, the crew's dying horribly.
Yeah,
it's very bleak.
It is.
Yes, I thought that was brilliant because this is the 1930s, 1920s, 1930s. This is the golden age of romantic space travel, right? Where the hero jumps onto his trusty steed spacecraft and flies to Mars or Andromeda. And there may be adventures, there may be a meteor or an attack by evil aliens, but the grit and dirt and misery of the existence on Mars is described in detail, driving the three men who escape to another, horrible existence mad. That seems like almost preternaturally realistic. I don't know if you've been paying attention, but yet once again, NASA landed on the moon and it tipped over. This is like several times. Just look up landers on the moon, and we seem to be unable to replicate the 1960s technology with 4K of memory. Just think about that. We can't land an unmanned spacecraft on the moon and it not fall over and all that money is wasted. Well, that tells you just how hard it is. Just to land on the moon, the greatest achievement of humankind, to land on the moon it's just too tough for us now with our modern culture. And 50 years, the universe is trying to kill us in every possible way.
Lovecraft had it right.
That's exactly right. Isn't it interesting that the speculative writers of the 30s got the true environment of space right? And the scientists talking about the glorious future were wildly underestimating how horrible it was out there.
Well, yeah, I mean, the first thing this brought to my mind is the line here, the inconceivably hostile environment of a cosmos not designed for men. It reminded me of the space race and all the dogs and monkeys and things that were basically, there was Laika, wasn't there, and Enos, the chimp, basically sent up by the US and the Russians and sent to their doom.
Oh, yeah.
That line could have been any YouTube video today describing how hard it is to have a colony on Mars or colony on the moon. Smith needs credit, like at NASA or the European Space Agency. That quote needs to be etched in gold somewhere.
Yeah,
I just find it remarkable. Your famous writer, John Christopher, who wrote the Tripods series and Prince and Waiting, he said that he stopped writing planetary fiction, space fiction, because he discovered there's no life anywhere in the solar system.
Oh, yeah.
We can't just jump into our spaceships and go places. He just felt there was nothing to write about anymore.
It's interesting that we get that. Then we had that optimism, I guess, perhaps in tandem with the lunar missions and the Apollos of Star Trek, which was, a very different vision of the future and space travel.
Yeah.
And yet, even at that time, a lot of the Apollo astronauts coming back were suffering depression, anxiety, all sorts of issues that some speculate is because of this idea of you look back and there's the Earth, and it's the size of a marble, and you just think, shit. Oh my God.
Yeah, you wouldn't need a laxative, would you?
As they say, space is big.
Yeah.
I think Smith gets so many things right here. He gets the daily misery. I always read these stories about how the Sky Lab and space station and astronauts are ground down because they're assigned to do all of these tasks because everybody wants to get their experiment in and test this and test that. That there's been a whole series of where they've rebelled and said, we're working too hard, stop, we're going to take a strike. There've been strikes in space, good old British strikes. Really, Smith is remarkable here. He gets 4 or 5 insights into the 21st century, which are dead on.
Yeah, because it's an interesting thing that I spotted here as well, because we get a little bit about that, most of them came, crashed wreckage, we could piece together from logs, that kind of stuff. And apparently the selenite, as we've mentioned before, we went into the name and all that thing before, but at the time of its disappearance, it was 1980.
Yes, I noticed that as well. Yeah, that was quite, well, I wrote down how optimistic.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because this story is being told 50 years later, so 2030. So
Indeed.
kind of now, really.
Yeah.
And look
5 years.
Look where we are now. God, I just see it in 5 years' time, we'll be even worse than we are now.
Well, the way it's going, yeah. Well, but yeah, it was like David was saying about landers going up there and falling over. And here we've got a small permanent colony on the Syrtis Major and all this kind of stuff. And this basically spacefaring society. It ain't going to happen in 5 years, is it?
No. I had a little bit on Syrtis Major, by the way, because I looked that up.
Oh, yeah.
This, it was thought to be a large plain on Mars, so I presume that's why Smith chose this particular location. It is actually what they call a shield volcano, which is, if you imagine a shield or a dish placed on the ground, so it's a volcano, but it's a very shallow slope. It's not like a Vesuvius type thing. So a huge area. That was discovered by the Mars Global Surveyor in around 2001, which, incidentally, speaking about things going wrong, they lost contact with it. Then they got a transmission back to say it had clicked itself into safe mode, and since then there's been no contact with that surveyor. And it's presumed it's still orbiting Mars at the moment, and they speculate it will be orbiting until about the year 2050. When it will come crashing down into the surface of Mars, much like the selenite does later on in this story. So there's a lot of interesting parallels in this.
Yeah, there is. That's interesting.
I mean, they're on Mars. There is a colony on Mars, but they're miserable and they're fighting with each other and they have rampant mental illness and disasters.
I was reminded, have either of you played the video game Moons of Madness?
No.
I wonder if that was inspired by this, because it's a Lovecraftian game. I won't go into too much details, but there's tentacular monstrosities and, all that good stuff. It's basically a first-person survival horror game set on some kind of moon. But a lot of that, the setup is very much like this. There were people there doing research. They started going a bit crazy. Some of them went off. Some of them shot themselves out the airlock. I wonder if the developer Funcom has read this story, because there's a lot of parallels.
That sounds spot on, doesn't it? Yeah.
I guess extreme location, Antarctica, right? Or the moon or Mars, where things start going wrong and people turn on each other. That's become extremely common for movies and television and games and so on. And I absolutely Lovecraft or Ashton Smith are as inspirations.
Oh, totally. We're very much in Thing territory, aren't we? And True Detective, the last season, and all that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, very much.
And I like the way that we have this. We've got this party of 15 on Mars, and they split up into cliques. I thought that, again, that was a nice observation on human nature. One of the cliques consisted of 3 men, Roger Colt, Phil Gershom, and Edmund Beverley. These 3, through banding together in a curious fashion, became intolerably antisocial towards all the others. It would seem they must have gone close to the borderline of insanity and were subject to actual delusions. At any rate, they conceived the idea that Mars, with its 15 Earthmen, was entirely too crowded. Voicing this idea in a most offensive and belligerent manner, they also began to hint their intention of faring even further afield in space. I love the idea that there's 15 people on Mars and you're crowding me, man. Back off.
Yeah. It's cabin fever, isn't it? Yeah. It really is. You get enough human beings trapped in a room with each other for an extended period of time, it's not going to go well.
You could almost imagine this on board a ship. It could be like the Mary Celeste or something, couldn't it? You know?
Yeah, well, that's something from the time period, isn't it? A lot of the space stories were written the same as the nautical stories. It was all very much a similar thing. I mean, there's echoes of Hodgson in this, in his Sargasso Sea stories, because a lot of them involve like a crew, they're becalmed, they go crazy, some weird stuff may or may not have happened.
Fungus.
Right. Oh, of course, there's fungus. It's William Hope Hodgson.
I think of lighthouse stories too.
Yeah, like the film The Lighthouse. I was actually thinking of that a bit later on. I was like, that's very, yeah. You know, Flannan Isle. And even Captain Oates, isn't it? You know, I'm going out for a walk. I may be gone sometime.
Maybe sometime.
Yeah. Well, one thing is, again, just getting away from this existential dread from a moment, is something I noticed here. Edmund Beverley. Now, that's a chap in tweed, isn't it?
That is. It's got to be a Yorkshireman, isn't he?
Edmund Beverley. Yeah.
From Beverley, perhaps.
Yeah. Flat cap, tweeds, shotgun, broken shotgun over the arm, you know.
I thought these were quite normal names for Smith as well. He does tend to go to quite strange names, but these are pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
Then I think he does that more in the science fiction stuff.
Although Roger Colt could be an action movie star.
It is a bit, isn't it?
Yeah. That's a bit Chuck Norris, isn't
it? I'd like to ask you a question about that, because I think this is something that comes up in social media discussions of weird literature of the time, like Lovecraft and Robert Howard. And was there like an actual enforcement about like who the heroes would be? Because again, I'm not somebody who wants to go back and cancel the past, but like there's no Jewish name, there's no Hindi name, there's no. I don't think there's an Irish name, you know. There's no Greek name. There's no other Europeans. Was that enforced at the magazine level? Like, let's have straightforward Protestant heroes, and if you stuck in like, the hero of my space adventure is Marco Giannini, that would be edited out by somebody. Was that just something that was understood, or I've never read like an actual passage, and I'm not much less of a scholar of Lovecraft, Howard, and Clark Ashton Smith. I've read some of the books of letters, but I certainly haven't deep dived into all of them. But did they ever mention that?
Well, I think with Lovecraft being such an Anglophile, and obviously we know his views on certain issues very well, I think that would have just naturally played in. I think with the British class system, it's something we're a bit like fish in water. We don't really know that we're in water. You know, we're someone outside says, "Yeah, you're all swimming around in water." And you go, "What do you mean?" And it's very difficult from outside that to see the rules, because there are very much rules still on social class and all the rest of it, but they're things you just sort of absorb as you grow up. So I think back at those times, it would have been totally natural for even people like Conan Doyle or anyone. Well, of course, your protagonist is going to be Arthur Ramsbottom of whatever, and is going to have gone to a good school and all the rest of it. And of course, your villain is going to be some ruffian from the East End, or perhaps a Chinese fella in Limehouse.
Yeah.
I think it's just so much part of the social fabric, very few people would have thought of writing anything else.
I think it also goes to the armed forces. It's the officer class, which is exactly what you're saying. If you think about it, the guys who are going to go on these missions, it's not going to be Private Johnson from Macclesfield, is it? It's going to be Captain Arthur Mandrake from Oxford, you know.
I want to read that. You've got to write that now.
Okay, all right, I'll do that.
Captain Mandrake. That's great. Captain Mandrake.
Nickname Pinky.
Arthur Pinky Mandrake. I love it. Right, I'm going to write that down. I'll do it. I don't think it was so much that, though. I don't think there was ever anybody who actually said, well, I've certainly not read or heard about any of the editors for any of the pulp magazines saying, no, you can't do this, that, and the other. I think it was just the societal norm bleeding through. I mean, yeah, like Rob said, it's the fish in water thing, isn't it? It's the frog that's being boiled and doesn't know it's being boiled. You know?
Yeah, that's very realistic. I agree.
Having said all that, I think there's two things that come up. One is the idea of the yokel knowledge, which we don't really get in this, to be fair, but that's a common thing, especially in Smith.
Oh, yeah.
And to some extent, well, in Howard as well.
Lovecraft.
But also, these three very well qualified scientific explorers just basically jump in a rocket, point it towards Jupiter and take off without checking the fuel, without checking the provisions, without really having much idea beyond we've got to get away from these other men.
Yeah.
Well, that reminds me, a number of years ago, we had a situation where we had two big budget movies come out, Deep Impact and Armageddon, which both had the idea of a celestial object that was going to crash into the Earth, and a space shuttle and a crew had to go up there and stop it somehow. And my critique, and I think a lot of people's critiques of those films, was that, yes, okay, it's Hollywood. There has to be drama. There has to be tension in any group, right? You can't just have a group happily working together to achieve a common goal. But to get to be an astronaut, you have to pass through so many filters of mental stability and professionalism and collaboration that people start like 5 minutes into the movie attacking each other and mocking each other, especially if you're going to be in these life or death situations where you depend on each other. And I think this goes back to the British Army, that you know, you can only screw around so much with people who you depend on them doing their job, and you survive, right? And most veterans will say, what, you know, no matter how horrific a war they were in was, and the experience, that the camaraderie, the band of brothers, was what they gained most and loved most. So I understand why Smith did that, but it is a challenge to believe that whoever's the space agency would allow this to happen.
I think there is an element of that, and that's something you see a lot in films where you get special forces guys, or again, you know, Space Marines, the elite force, and within 5 minutes they're all freaking out. But I think also the other thing, this plays into perhaps more of a British thing, is your upper class officers or people in charge are there because of the school they went to, not their capabilities.
Yeah. It's sharp. It's Bernard Cornwell. It's sharp because all the officers are completely useless, and the only reason they're there is because they either bought their commission or were given it by an uncle, or, you know, sheer nepotism, and you know, they didn't have a clue what they were doing, and just complete cowardice and all the rest of it. The people who knew what they were doing were the guys with the rifles who were experienced, sergeants and your NCOs and your da-da-da-da-da. Yeah, so yeah, it always reminds me of the line from one of the Sharp adaptations with Sean Bean. It's don't you know who I am? I know what you are.
Bastard.
Yeah, you're a bastard.
I get our bingo in, bastard.
Yeah.
Well, we definitely have developed over the years the picture of the British upper class twit, or the British officer who nearly gets his men killed, but there's the tough Welsh NCO from the mountain, you know, from
Windsor Davies.
Men of Harlex of your dreaming.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, in this story, that falls apart, and I think this the only reason we're given is this proximity and just the terrible conditions there. This is what's lost when everybody is Ramsay Carbottom.
I think this is very much a case of too many cooks, isn't it? I think that's the problem. You've got too many officers, too many people with egos, too many egos and ideas, and not enough people to actually do anything useful. So they probably just, in my head, they just sat around there going, "No, well, I think we should go and da 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 da. Well, I think we should go blah 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 blah," and that's where you get the cliques.
Maybe because if you had had an NCO here, as they got in that rocket, he would have said, "Have you checked the fuel reserve, sir?"
Yeah, exactly.
Have you checked the rations there? I noticed they've only got 3 sandwiches.
So, Tim, you are making the case that the traditional British class system would be an improvement in space because everybody knew their place and there would be no tension.
Well, I think not so much a class structure, but any kind of hierarchical structure is there for a purpose. Like you have people who are specifically for specific things, don't you? Like Star Trek. You have the guy whose job is to make sure that the photon cannons work, right? And somebody else who makes sure that the communications works. And there's probably is on the below deck somewhere, probably is a catering guy who makes sure they've got more than 3 sandwiches on the shuttle.
Well, that's a really important point. And I'm thinking of another trope that is very common in science fiction where there's a mission, a base, a mission to space or something, and there's the scientists, and then there's the military people, right? And the military people have their way of doing things, and the scientists are often rebellious, and I don't want to follow orders, and maybe it's me, but I've always sympathized a little bit with the military people because, like in space, you really have to be careful. You can't just have everybody going off and doing whatever they want because you die. Just like a submarine or a ship.
Yes. Yeah. We try to keep you alive.
Procedures. Procedures. A military are very good at procedures.
Yeah.
So these 3 men escape. They see it as escaping from the horror, but they don't go back to Earth. That's what's interesting. They in their madness, they think that like escape is going deeper into space, into a more inhospitable area. Now, why did they do that?
Well, this is where they disappear, right? Because we get this. After that departing flash on the Martian skies, the selenite was not seen again, and its fate remained a mystery for 30 years. Then, on tiny remote Phocea, its dented wreck was found by the Haldane expedition to the asteroids. Phocea at the time of the expedition's visit was in aphelion. Like others of the planetoids, it was discovered to possess a rare atmosphere, too thin for human breathing. Both hemispheres were covered with thin snow, and lying amid this snow, the selenite was sighted by the explorers as they circled about the little world. So we've got a direct reference back to the opening paragraph. Now, this is where it gets a bit questionable from a scientific perspective, because Phocea is an asteroid. I think it's about 75 kilometers in diameter. I doubt it's got any sort of atmosphere at all, let alone seasons and snow and everything else.
And fruit.
And fruit and veg.
Yeah, fruit and veg. Yeah.
It was actually discovered in 1853 by Jean Chacornac, a French astronomer. So it had been known for quite a while. This is part of the asteroid belt, of course, which lies between Mars and Jupiter. To date, they have identified and named 600,000 asteroids within that, though there's far more, so there's a huge amount. One other thing I wanted to ask about this was the name Haldane. Haldane. Was there a Haldane in a previous story? It rings a bell, but I can't remember which story it was from.
There was a Haldane, yeah. No, there was.
Well, he was a famous scientist. I don't know if he was famous in 1929, but in the 40s and 50s, he was probably the Carl Sagan or the Richard Feynman, like always quoted. Sure. He's the one who was asked about, do we know the nature of God from nature? And he said, well, we know that God has an inordinate fondness for beetles.
That's very Lovecraftian.
Yeah, so he was the quotable scientist of Britain and America for about 20 years. But it sounds like a pretty British upper class name. I don't necessarily recognize it.
I love this next paragraph here because it suddenly gets really grim. Peering in through one of the thick, unbreakable neocrystal ports, they met the eyeless gaze of a human skeleton which had fallen forward against the slanting, overhanging wall. It seemed to grin a sardonic welcome. Sardonic welcome. Now there's a band name.
That's a good, yeah. That's our first band name.
Yeah.
I also liked in this that I mentioned the manhole lid was so thoroughly jammed that it was impossible to effect an entrance. The idea in these old rockets, you got in and out through like a manhole cover.
A manhole cover. Yeah, I like that. But you see that in like 60s Doctor Who and stuff. This little hatch pops up on the top of the spaceship and they just climb out,
Yeah.
Like, like the lid of a tank kind of thing. Yeah.
Was it Arthur C. Clarke who changed all that with the Door Deliquest? That famous line. I don't know if it was Clark or not. I can't remember.
The famous Star Trek. Shh.
This is almost like discovering the ghost ship, right? We spoke about the Mary Celeste earlier, or the Hodgson. Enormous withered cryptogamous plants with a habit of vines that crumbled at a touch were clinging to the hole and the adjacent rocks. In the light snow beneath the skeleton-guarded port, a number of sharded bodies were lying, which proved to be those of tall insect forms, like giant phasmidae. So it's like the ship is covered. The impression you get there was almost that these things were attacking the ship. That's sort of what it feels like. And this poor guy was trapped inside. But that's far from the truth, as we find out.
Yeah, it's that sort of nature reclaiming things, which is another trope of all these kind of stories where there's some doomed voyage. You always find nature reclaiming, whether it be vines or moss or fungi, especially Hodgson, it's fungi, isn't it? But
and this brings us into our captain's log, right? So
there's a horror that I wanted to talk about in the voyage there. Successively, two of the other explorers apparently have gone mad, right?
Yeah.
But what a Smith corpse a fun element is that the corpses remain next to the ship flying through space, right? And which is, of course, is a trope of watching a skeleton in a spacesuit or a dead man in a spacesuit out of your window of your porch or locker or viewport there, which we've seen in a lot of horror science fiction.
Oh, yeah. This is what we get in the log. In effect, this madness continues, right? We've got morphine being given in doses.
Yeah, they're all drugged out of their minds, aren't they, at this point? Yeah.
And Gershom, in effect, he throws himself out the airlock. And then, as you say, we get this real macabre touch of him following the ship. That reminded me a little bit of the temple as well in the U-boat with Lovecraft.
Yeah. I was reminded, did you remember Disney's Black Hole? When Disney went dark and weird.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, the mad scientist guy at the end, and he's tumbling in space in the black hole sort of thing. Just Event Horizon as well.
Yeah, 2001, the space.
2001, yeah.
Both Alien and Aliens, when they expelled the monster.
Yeah. And then, Colt joins him as well, because Colt becomes addicted to the morphine, eventually turns violent, and he ends up shooting him, right? And then sticking him out the airlock where he floats alongside Gershom.
It's really grim because both the bodies are caught in the gravitational field. So they're just following along behind these two corpses. You can just see them there, can't you? It's almost like some weird music video. They'd be singing, wouldn't they? The skeletons in the thing.
Oh, yeah. And it's lovely description from Smith here. Going to the rear ports, I saw his body with a pale, slightly bloated face and open, bulging eyes. It was following us like a satellite, keeping an even distance of 10 or 12 feet from the lee of the vessel's stern. I could have gone out in a spacesuit to retrieve the body, but I felt sure that Gershom was already dead, and the effort seemed more than useless. So that's got to add to the psychic pressure, right? To the feeling of doom and despair. You got this one, eventually two corpses I can imagine occasionally they bump into the side of the ship and they loom up against the porthole.
Yeah. That'd be the jump scare, with a nice sting on the strings on the soundtrack, right?
I'm remembering there was a television series in the Twilight Zone and Outer Limits tradition called One Step Beyond.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And
One step.
Unless I'm mixing up shows, wasn't there an episode where a German U-boat kept being given away by banging, and they trace it to the hull, and they discover that a slave labor prisoner who had been used to construct the U-boat was entombed there, and his skeleton was trying to give them away to the enemy.
That was based on a true story. I mean, I don't know how much of the thing banging on the hull to give it away was true, but there was certainly one U-boat that was said to be cursed, and they did discover that during its construction, someone had fallen in the gap, so to speak, and it was one of those, sailors very superstitious, apparently, submariners even more so.
Oh yeah.
So it's one of those, this ship is cursed kind of jobs.
I have a question at this point. So we know from reading the diary up to now that our narrator is at the edge of madness. Is our narrator a reliable narrator?
Well, that's the standard weird fiction thing, right? We just don't know.
Right.
I don't think he's reliable at all.
Again, if we think from a scientific perspective, we've got stick insects, we've got fruit and veg, we've got these seasons that change very quickly, none of which sounds very viable on an asteroid that's somewhere out between Mars and Jupiter.
Now, they did find some sort of dried vines attached. So some part of what this person saw and described was true.
Yeah, there is that. Yeah,
but he does mention that he's having the same hallucinations as the first chap that went out for a walk. So yeah, he's seeing things. So maybe Colt didn't do anything wrong and he just shot him,
And he rationalized it all.
Yes, he rationalized it in his head. That's what I love about weird fiction.
I mean, now we have to find out what the Haldane expedition returned to.
Did they bring something back with them, right? Because we see this thing at the end, right? So we get the crash landing on the asteroid. Basically, he runs out of fuel. He passes out. And he wakes up and he's crash landed onto the asteroid. And then we get into sort of the second phase of the story with the appearance of these aliens. Again, we get nice Smithian descriptions. The selenite had plunged into a shallow valley and had half buried its prow and bottom in a soil that was formed by decomposing rock, mainly basaltic. All about were fretted ridges, guttering pillars and pinnacles. And over these, amazingly, there clambered frail, pipy, leafless vines with broad yellow-green tendrils, flat and thin as paper. Insubstantial-looking lichens, taller than a man and having the form of flat antlers, grew in single rows and thickets along the valley, besides rills of water like molten moonstone. Molten moonstone, that's nice.
Oh, that's a prog rock album. It's got to be a prog rock album.
That's a prog rock album cover.
Oh yeah, of course it is.
Roger Dean, was it, I think?
Yeah, Roger Dean. Yeah.
So even this lifeless asteroid he brings to life.
It's really the greatest shame of the many tragedies of Clark Ashton Smith's life that none of those Hollywood deals came through, because so many of his stories, I mean, I don't think it should be a one-for-one screenplay, but could have been the basis of a great 1950s, 60s science fiction movie.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, you can see it, can't you? You can see it in your mind, this, a kind of Forbidden Planet kind of era, perhaps, or I think with the insects, I was thinking them. With the giant ants, that sort of
I mean,
thing.
you could have had The Thing. Of course, The Thing is based on a science fiction story, John Campbell.
Yes. Who goes there?
And there's tension. It's not quite like the John Carpenter version where they're really like ready to murder each other. It's a different thing. It's exciting there. But Clark Ashton Smith gets to the later John Carpenter version of the people going mad and turning on each other 50 years earlier.
Yeah.
This is where the insects make their first appearance, and we get again another brilliant Smith description of them here. What they really were, I do not know, but for want of other analogies, I must liken them to insects. Standing perfectly erect, they towered 7 feet in air, their eyes like faceted opals at the end of curving protractile stalks rose level with the port. Their unbelievably thin limbs, their stem-like bodies, comparable to those of the phasmidae, or walking sticks, were covered with grey-green shards. Their heads, triangular in shape, were flanked with immense perforated membranes and were fitted with mandibular mouths that seemed to grin eternally. Quite menacing creatures, you know.
I was getting real praying mantis vibes off of that as well.
Yeah.
You know that things mantis do, they angle the head and it's looking at me.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, very creepy. But their intentions are not hostile at all.
No, they're quite benign, aren't they? You know.
Well, they start bringing him offerings, don't they? And it seems like they are genuinely trying to communicate with him. And they're communicating with each other as well, it seems.
And that's where you could have a much longer story. I mean, again, you could have them find a way to get him out, and the air is, I mean, it's science fiction fantasy, right? So the air turns out to be reasonably breathable, or the vines give off oxygen or something like that. You could have a whole adventure with them. But I really like, again, this is Smith pioneering something very early, is that the hideous monsters are not necessarily evil or have nefarious intent. That if you could just find a way to communicate with them and have come there in a bigger spaceship with more supplies that could lift off, you could have made first contact, right? This could be a friendly first contact.
Yeah, I don't think it needs fleshing out, because I like how grim it is. The fact that for once the hero of one of these stories, for want of a better term, hero, has landed on a planet where the aliens are not hostile, but he can't actually meet them. That's pretty grim when you think about it. He's trapped in a bubble
because he can't get out. The manhole's jammed. He can't break the portholes, right?
And he can't tell them how to get out. Yeah. So I think that really adds a level of desperation to it. You know, can you imagine the despair? You know, like there's these creatures, these wondrous looking things bringing you food, and you can't get it.
That's true. That's true. And I think, to be fair to Smith, is aliens, well, we've always said he veers away from the guy in a rubber suit kind of idea. They're always very imaginative. But when I think of City of the Singing Flame or the Door to Saturn,
oh yeah,
where the people become involved with the aliens and there is that communication, I know there are creatures that are destructive, but he shies away from that as a regular trope.
Yeah. I like how you glossed over that. Door to Saturn. Interact. you mean interstellar rumpy pumpy?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
I also see a connection here to Lovecraft. I was just listening to a good reading of The Color Out of Space. And now there, of course, you have from our knowledge, I mean, we don't know what its values are. You have a very perfidious, nefarious alien who's doing damage to humans. But of course, he could be just trying to get home.
Sure.
E.T. E.T. is actually based on Color Out of Space, I think. But I think it's interesting for Smith to play with that. But the comparison that I want to make to Lovecraft is that, which really struck me, like the very first time I ever read Lovecraft was the first time I encountered the concept that the alien species, the elder gods, and of course, I mean, the science fiction and fantasy just run into each other, may have value systems and beliefs and even communication patterns and ideologies and ideas that are untranslatable to us. It's not like, well, yeah, we have a king too, but we call him the Bogats. I mean, just a lot of science fiction was just everything had an equivalent, right? An empire or emperor and so on. But I feel in this story, the aliens are appropriately alien.
Yes.
And I think it does add in that interesting extra layer, as Tim said there, where you've got this communication potential, but it is stymied. There's no way he can do it. And we can only guess as to what would happen if he was able to get out. Because these things are, in a sense, they're like mayflies, right? They live for one season. I also like this fact that we have, September the 11th, September the 12th, et cetera, then we just get later.
Yes. Yeah.
Because his chronometer has packed up as the ship is winding down. He doesn't know how many days this have been. So there's that added dislocation of time as well. So I think if he had have gone out, as we see, this place goes into a very deep winter. It's doubtful he would have survived that anyway, I think. So in that way, it's doubly grim.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, because you get that he knows this as well, but he's kind of powerless to do anything about it. So when you take that all on board, it's a really grim narrative when you think about it.
Well, going back to communication, there, he's a scientist. Is it ever said like he's a scientist of what?
No,
we don't know who he is. Yeah.
So in this, I really enjoy reading these discussions of if we had some ability to contact aliens, and I don't personally believe interstellar space travel is ever going to happen, but like if we were watching the radio telescopes, trying to detect something, what would be a universal language, something to talk there? And one of the discussions is that, of course, there's certain ratios in nature that if you develop enough physics and astronomy and chemistry, you would notice that you could represent mathematically, and that would be a great signal to there. And I think there have been other stories. I guess this is true of more modern stories. I'm thinking of the Ted Chiang story that became the movie, and I'm blanking now, with Amy Adams, where these aliens come, and it's the question of how do you communicate with them.
Was that the Jodie Foster one?
Well, there's that, obviously. But there was a more recent one with the giant octopod aliens in the spaceship. And I was looking this up, and I'm just going to read directly here. The 1/137 is the fine structure constant. It characterizes the strength of the electromagnetic interaction between elementary charged particles. And apparently everywhere you look in nature, there's this ratio of 1/137. So if you are trying to contact aliens, put 1/ on the dirt and then put 137 next to it, and they'll go, "Oh my gosh, you're an intelligent species, my brothers," or others. Let's talk about it.
Or you just go, doo, 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 doo.
Well, they may have been doing 1/137. I don't know. Yeah,
that could be, couldn't it?
Or Beethoven or Mozart.
That's what SETI's all about, isn't it? The whole Yeah. The whole reason behind SETI is to try and figure out how the hell you would communicate with aliens if they did appear.
That famous gold record that they sent.
Yes, the gold record and the picture of the man and the woman and all that. Yeah,
Carl Sagan helped design that, I think, didn't he?
Yes, he did. Yeah.
I, for one, welcome our new alien overlords. I just want to put that out there in whatever form it might get.
Insects, and they are insects, right? The story. So there you go.
I love bugs. I'm pro bug, so I'll be fine.
So then, as I say, we get this sense of winter is coming, all right? And we have this.
Was that?
Sorry, I've been watching House of the Dragon. I slipped into not Targaryen, what are they called? Jon Snow.
Yeah.
At the moment. One of my many vocal talents.
That was brilliant.
Bastard. And I like this. This is a very nice touch as well, that as the vines are turning autumnal, the sun revolves in a lower arc above the saw-toothed horizon. And the people of the asteroid appear less often. They seem fewer in number, and their sacrificial gifts are rare and scant. No longer do they bring sponge-like fruits, but only pale and porous fungi that seem to have been gathered in caverns. So it's this real cycle of nature that the fruit and the veg is all dying off, and all they've got to offer now are these odd mushrooms.
Yeah. And that's another trope that I think, I don't know, Smith probably didn't invent it, but I'm trying to think of a lot of science fiction stories where you land on an alien planet and they have very extreme seasons. I mean, even more than ours.
Yeah.
There's actually a Larry Niven short story about aliens who land on the Earth, like, I don't know, 100 million years ago, and they don't have any change of seasons on their planet. So when they start seeing all of life on Earth dying, they think they caused it. And they immediately go away, and they come back 100 million years later. So, oh my gosh, we're so glad you're still alive. We thought we had killed off, all the life in Yorkshire.
I'm making no comment.
Neither am I. I'm from the other side of the Pennines, mate.
Yeah, even more, right?
Yeah, exactly.
The bloody War of the Roses. We'll never forget that.
Exactly. That's the one. Yeah.
And again, Smith excels himself here because eventually the insects stop coming at all. The black frost of space has fallen upon my spirit. Strange, I did not feel so utterly bereft and alone while the insect people came daily. Now that they come no more, I seem to have been overtaken by the ultimate horror of solitude, by the chill terror of an alienation beyond life. I can write no longer, for my brain and my heart fail me. So it's just that sheer isolation of being out in space again, really.
Yeah.
It's beautiful. And we think the beginning of the story was about him going mad because he was around people. And now he's saying the ultimate madness is solitude. It's beautiful, the arc of this character and the description.
Yeah. You get this lovely thing that, like, he spends what seems to be an eternity of darkness and madness in the flyer, of death and winter in the world outside. And then we get the reappearance of these aliens. But the way it's written, because my modernly tuned brain, I completely misread it in a kind of, I misinterpreted it, because it's the walking stick people have reappeared before the flyer, but it's actually the walking stick people. But I read it as the walking stick people, and I thought that's an interesting way of describing Eastbourne.
Very good. Yeah. That's a bit like helping your Uncle Jack off a horse, isn't it?
Yeah.
But they return. But this is the next generation, right? Because they look younger, they're smaller. So again, we're seeing this cycle of nature. Again, even on this lifeless asteroid, and the food supply is really getting low now, and it's one last desperate attempt to get out. It's tried hitting the crystal ports with a monkey wrench. Owing partly to my weightlessness, they are as futile as the tapping of a feather. Anyway, in all likelihood, the outside air would be too thin for human respiration. They're bringing the fruit back. It's interesting to speculate what they think he is, isn't it? Because we have God of the Asteroid. Perhaps this is just like someone drops in your house unexpectedly. You make a cup of tea, right? You offer them some biscuits. Perhaps it's no more than that.
Yeah, it could be friendliness. It's human ego to assume, oh, they think I'm a god, right? I mean, if you think about it, that's a wonderful analogy you set up there, is that, like, I don't know, you're visiting a tribal area of northern Burma or something like that, and you get lost from the tourist group, and I'm probably not in Myanmar, you would do that, but somewhere you get lost from a tourist group and you wander into a village and you're all haggard and confused, and the people bring you fruit and water and try to take care of you. Your first thought wouldn't be, oh, I see, I'm a god to them. You should be like, thank you, local people, for being so kind.
But it used to be, right? That used to be the assumption, I would imagine, back in the day.
That's right. The British explorer would assume.
Yeah, of course.
But we have no record of that. I'm interested to know, I guess this is a question for a historian, of first contact between Europeans and natives. I mean, the Spanish flattered themselves thinking that the Aztecs believed that they were Quetzalcoatl, that they were returning gods. And I think that that's very controversial about whether they actually thought that.
Ah, right, because that's always the narrative that I'd read about that because of the description and everything. But is that a sort of Spanish take on the situation?
Yeah, I'm not a scholar of this area, but I think the modern take of historians is that Montezuma, the Aztec king, well, first of all, there was a hospitality tradition. And second, he thought that he could use the Spanish as allies. It wasn't that these are gods. I mean, you would learn pretty quickly, spending some time with a conquistador, that they're not gods.
Yes.
You had to burn incense because they stunk so badly. I mean, that we know that from the native sources. I mean,
So then we get to the final horror. I mean, it's pretty much doomed anyway, as we know, but he's not just going to fade out, is he? Perhaps I am a little delirious and have begun to imagine things, but I have just perceived an odd phenomenon, hitherto unnoted. I don't know what it is. A thin, columnar mist, moving and writhing like a serpent, with opal colours that change momently, has appeared among the rocks and is approaching the vessel. It seems like a live thing, like a vaporous entity, and somehow it is poisonous and inimical. It glides forward, rearing above the throng of phasmidae, who have all prostrated themselves as if in fear. I see it more clearly now. It is half transparent, with a web of grey threads among its changing colours, and it is putting forth a long, wavering tentacle. That's classic Star Trek, isn't it? Absolutely classic Star Trek. And I can even hear the sound effects and the music that goes with that.
Yeah, it'd be a whoop, 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 whoop kind of thing, wouldn't it?
and the death of Red Shirt Smith.
Yes. Yeah, you get a lovely model shot of a nice tentacle with a stick man in it, wrapped up in it, being waved around. Yeah.
And that sort of noise like, bow.
Yeah.
So we're sure that this is a completely separate form of life, that this has nothing to do with the insect people. Is that was my assumption? Am I wrong?
And we have seen one other form of life before, right? Because there were night creatures that came and ate the fruit and veg.
Right. So there's a whole ecosystem there.
Yeah.
But this is almost now like if they don't worship this, they certainly fear it, or they prostrate themselves as if in fear. So are they just trying to hide, or is that this sort of bowing down to this thing and thinking, I hope it doesn't choose me?
Yeah. Interesting, isn't it?
Perhaps that is the god of the asteroid.
Ah.
Oh,
nice. I like it. Yeah, I like it.
Great wisdom, human.
I have my moments.
You are truly wise among us.
It is some rare life form unknown to earthly science, and I cannot even surmise its nature and attributes. Perhaps it is the only one of its kind on the asteroid. No doubt it has just discovered the presence of the selenite and has been drawn by curiosity, like the walking stick people.
Well, you go back that the skeleton was found with a sardonic grin.
Yeah.
So maybe it's the last realization before death was that I'm not the god of the asteroid. This is.
Yes, very good. Yeah.
The Smith's many, many layers of insight and cleverness.
And we get the classic, some might say, Lovecraftian ending in a sense.
Indeed. Frank Belknap Long, isn't it?
Yeah. The tentacle has touched the hole. It has reached the port behind which I stand, penciling these words. The grey threads in the tentacle glow as if with sudden fire. My God, it is coming through the neo-crystal lens.
And the last words were, yeah.
Aye.
That's right.
Frank Belknap Long, isn't it? The Hounds of Tinderlost,
For $40 for this just beautiful, well-crafted jewel. We've just pointed out about how, you start out with alienation because you're with humans and you end with madness because of isolation. You begin thinking you're the god of the asteroid, and you're killed by the real god of the asteroid. Just think of how Smith thought through even this short pulp story, that it has all these intricate tendrils of ideas and plot.
Yeah, you say about $40, but according to Google, so take this with a pinch of salt, the equivalent in purchasing power today is $760. It's not bad for about 500 words.
Yeah, not bad, I suppose. Yeah, I wouldn't turn my nose up at that.
No, $760 for a short story. Blimey.
Yeah, but if that's your only income, like how many do you have to write? Yeah, I mean that's the part, right? Is if you have a day job as an IT manager, yeah, that's great. But if you're living off of it, but you're right. I mean, that was a windfall, but boy, Smith created a beautiful small jewel for that windfall.
Oh yeah, definitely.
It is for a short story where, again, a relatively simple plot. There's so many layers to it. And I mean, we say this a lot, don't we? That one of the things we like about analysing these stories, and a lot of the other best weird tales as well, is they lead you down all these little rabbit holes.
Oh,
There's lots of room for conjecture, and you think, oh, what if? And in some ways, they ask more questions than they answer.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think we're so blessed to have the letters that we do. I guess there was no equivalent of a podcast at the time. I mean, there was radio, but is there any record of Smith being interviewed by any media? Was he ever interviewed?
I think he wrote pieces and things for fanzines later on, but it was literally just more like an essay kind of thing. An actual sit down interview, not to my knowledge.
Yeah.
In fact, one of the only of the early ones, weirdly, is that I can think of would be Algernon Blackwood. He was on TV, but no.
Dunsany did tours and stuff, didn't he?
Yeah.
But I'm not seeing any interview as such with him, I don't think, or certainly no recordings. I mean, Lovecraft's voice was never recorded.
No.
Robert E. Howard, there would be features about him in the local press at times, I believe.
I know people made a pilgrimage in his later years, late 50s, early 60s. One of the Nightshade later editions is his short works from his childhood, which, by the way, this was a brilliant 14-year-old. I was embarrassed at how fantastic his writing and his insight. He wrote about how you should write a short story, an essay at 14.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And anyway, there's a tribute to him there by a poet that I'm blanking on his name, but he talked about actually traveling to visit 62, 63 Smith in Auburn, and Smith was he was married at that time, and the wife and Smith were very congenial hosts, and
that'd be Carol Smith. Yeah.
Yeah. And Smith gave him a copy of one of his books and signed it, and but I mean, so there was contact, but there wasn't the world today where authors go on I guess for this level of author, there wasn't a speaking tour or radio tour.
No.
I think, again, maybe if he'd have got that Universal movie deal, and maybe that would have brought him more to prominence, and then the other stuff would have followed. Obviously, the other guys weren't around by then, so they sort of missed out on that. I mean, we can only speculate if Howard had lived into the 60s and 70s and seen Frazetta and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
What would have happened there?
Well, you've only got to look at the contemporary, Robert Bloch.
He became a star.
Yeah, exactly. I've seen hundreds of interviews with him about various things, about his films and plots and da-da-da-da-da. He pops up as talking heads on documentaries about werewolves and things like that, So you can imagine if and that all comes because he got the success that movies brought. So
and hired too, right? I mean, that's another thing. Is that Smith was there in California. If he'd gotten a little bit of a Hollywood breakthrough, because one of the things that happens when your book is bought by Hollywood is you also have the opportunity, we need a rewrite on this horror film. Can we bring you down? And then there's big money.
Oh yeah,
Richard Matheson, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Harlan Ellison as well, and Bloch, obviously, because he wrote episodes of Boris Karloff's Thriller and
Star Trek.
Star Trek and Twilight Zone and all this kind of stuff. Yeah.
George R. R. Martin, people forget he was a TV writer. I mean, before Game of Thrones, he did many things, but somebody offers you a writing opportunity, you don't turn it down, especially if there's media money there.
Well, we're back to paying the bills again, right? Speaking of letters, by the way, we don't really have anything in Dawnwood Spire, Lonely Hill. Nothing significant. There's one or two brief little mentions. But I just wanted to reference this. This is from the Steve Behrens book, Clark Ashton Smith, A Critical Guide to the Man and His Work. It is significant that Smith wrote less frequently for the sci-fi magazines as his career as a fictioner matured. By the time he had begun to withdraw from fiction writing, his science fiction had all but disappeared. This was due in part to the falling out he had with Wonder Stories, his most lucrative market for science fiction, but Smith had never really been comfortable writing for any of the sci-fi magazines. In an article calling Smith the poet of science fiction, Arthur Hillman wrote that he and a few others were fighting a losing battle against the latest trend of heavy science, which, with the growing awareness of the social and mechanical aspects of science fiction, brought a decline in tales of ingenious wonder. Smith, of course, recognized the irony of his position as a fantasy writer tailoring his products for the sci-fi market. After selling The Eternal World to Wonder Stories, he shared a chuckle with August Derleth. Gernsback advised me to put more realism into my future stories, saying that the late ones were verging dangerously on the weird. That's really quite a josh, as well as a compliment. I thought that was nice.
Yeah. You actually see that at the big lit cons that I've been to, that you tend to get the people who are into the hard sci-fi. They don't like the fantastical end of it at all. They really don't. It's like two warring factions. To this day, it's like, seriously, you can see them at the bar, like shooting daggers at each other. Like, he doesn't know what star drives components are. It's all a bit.
It doesn't matter because I've just got a magic spell that makes everything work.
Yeah, exactly. It's all a bit strange. It's quite funny.
Oh dear, fandom.
Fandom. Yeah.
I think we talked last time when I was growing up, I was very, very much attracted to historical war games, ones that recreated Stalingrad or Operation Market Garden, but that had a lot of historical details. Not quite recreating the actual battle, but there was just so much there that made you feel that at least you were embedded in history. And our arch enemies were the Dungeons and Dragons players.
You still get that as well.
Well, I think less so now, to be honest. But yeah, that was a thing.
Well, that's what's interesting is you have now a lot of genre crossing content like Warhammer 40,000, where you have tank laser battles, but then some of the people who are fighting are dragon people. I mean, just so the genres have crossed there. So, but Clark Ashton Smith, could we again? I defer to your greater knowledge of him. You don't have to have read any Clark Ashton Smith story to appreciate any Clark Ashton Smith story, right? You don't have to be embedded in the universe and have read 30 comic books before you read a story, right?
That's a strength, but it's also a weakness. In that, one reason we often said that we don't think Smith became as popular as Lovecraft or Howard was that lack of continuity in a way, in the sense that he had, Zothic and Averoin and Mars and Hyperborea, a diffuse range of settings. There was nothing you could settle on as, I'm reading this Clark Ashton Smith. Like, I'm reading the Robert E. Howard Conan stories at the moment. So, all right, they were, what did he write, 30, 40 of them or something? There's a kind of body of work there. And then you might look at his other characters. With Lovecraft, everyone gets drawn in because of the mythos, generally.
Absolutely.
And Howard for the character, right? So there's a continuity. And of course, that means that other people can create, like today, I mean, how many thousands of Conan stories have been written
Well, in fact, James Lovegrove, who we spoke to, has just written one. He's just written the latest Titan Conan. So,
But I mean, you can write a Smith-like story, and I guess you could write a story set in some, like Asteroid, as you mentioned, but it's not the same as either the Lovecraft mythos or the Howard Hyperborean world.
So you've got to be such a bloody good writer to pull it off is one barrier. And I'm not saying that Lovecraft and Howard weren't good writers, but it's a different thing, I think.
Yeah, because to my mind, there's only really been two recurring characters, really. There was obviously Captain Douchebag, Captain Volmar, and Satan Prazeros, because you had the Tale of Satan Prazeros and the Seven Gaiuses. And no. Theft of 39 Girdles. That's it.
39.
Yeah, that's it.
I suppose we had City of the Singing Flame as well, but that's kind of.
Yeah.
Was that Haldane? Was it?
That may have been it. Was it Haldane or Hastane, or I don't know. There's several. He tends to use several names that are quite similar.
Did he ever get any advice from the Circle or others or agents? I mean, again, today, I think from what I understand, and you have more contact with writers than I do, that like somebody would actually physically say to you, look, you need a continuing character. You need like a 10 books to plan out in the series. But did anybody ever tell Smith, like, hey, you want to sell more of these, have a Superman, have a Conan, have somebody who just keeps showing up in one world?
I've had it myself, because a book I've got coming out in May apparently has the vagaries of the publishing world has when the publisher took it, they said, can you write 2 more?
Everyone wants a series. I mean, it's the standard advice to any author is you write a series, you don't just write one. Right, whether it's short story or novella or whatever. But I think as far as that goes, I think Lovecraft was such a fanboy, he wouldn't have criticised Smith in any way, shape or form. I think people often think that Smith was part of the Lovecraft circle, but Lovecraft was actually part of the Smith circle.
The Smith circle, yeah. The only one who did criticise Smith at all was Derleth. And that was usually to try and get him to do something to get it out, or to try and help him in some way. I mean, because he would actually say, I don't think this plot, you might want to flesh that out. So I think if anybody would have said it, it would have been him. But from reading the letters, I haven't read all of them yet, because it's a monstrous tome. But I haven't come across that yet. But if I do, I will let you know.
So there's just one other thing I want to touch on in relation to this story specifically, in that there were 2 things this reminded me of. One was a favourite film from my childhood. Well, it was actually made in 1964 when I was 1. So I must have seen it a few years later. Robinson Crusoe on Mars.
Oh, yes.
Which is kind of an identical story in a way. We have Adam West and Paul Mantei as 2 astronauts who their spaceship develops a fault, and both of them get in a single pod each and crash land on Mars. Adam West expires. I thought, by the way, it was interesting. His name in the story is Macready, which is a name that comes up a bit later on. So Paul Mantei is literally stranded alone on Mars. He starts to hallucinate Macready talking to him, which was an interesting little thing. His only other companion is Mona the monkey, but he does eventually get who he calls his Friday, which is there's an alien attack and there's various things happen. So he does he gets his Friday, and spoiler alert, at the end he gets rescued. The other interesting thing for that was part of this alien attack, the spaceships look very familiar to me, the way they moved and everything else. And apparently it was a guy called Albert Nazaki who did that, who was the guy who did the effects for War of the Worlds, the 1953 version. So very similar feel to it.
Nice.
And then just very quickly, the Star Trek episode that put me in mind of this is the Galileo 7, where the shuttlecraft crash lands and they're attacked. They were like sort of big giant things, weren't they? chucking huge polystyrene spears and rocks around.
I was going to say there's a lot of polystyrene in that one.
And there's a lot of tension between Spock and I think McCoy and Scott and all that sort of thing. But yeah, that idea of stranded on the alien planet, yeah.
Well, it's probably one of the oldest tensions of human beings. You know, we had to rely on each other in small bands of hunter-gatherers for millions of years of our existence. And certainly since we were anatomically modern humans. And as I said, this idea of like cities and houses and being together with thousands of people and relying on plumbers and police and university professors.
It'll cost you. It'll cost you.
Yeah. Is a very recent innovation that I think our brain has not quite adapted to yet.
Well, wasn't it Mahatma Gandhi who said, actually he said on a visit to East London, as I'm going there on Saturday, he went to, he visited a place in Whitechapel, I think it was a college or something. And that was where apparently someone said to him, what do you think of Western civilization? And he said, oh, I think it would be a great idea.
Yes. Classic.
There we are then, the god of the asteroid. Now, this does mark the final story in season 3. It's the final story in volume 3 of Vintage from Atlantis. So before we talk about what we're going to do to wrap up the season, I believe we've got some messages in. We've got a couple of letters in the mailbag, so to speak.
Indeed, yeah. We got one here from Salty K 2795. I just discovered your channel a couple of weeks ago and have sampled some of your Lovecraft and Smith episodes, mostly Smith. You have, I think, the most perfect balance of erudition, charming banter, background knowledge and research, and a general sense of fun that I've heard in a podcast about this weird fiction stuff. I particularly love the favourite word and band name segments / jokes. Your love of the material and your accumulated experience with the craft shine through. Well fragging done, gents. My favourite podcast at the moment. I look forward to subscribing to your Patreon soon and maybe sharing a pint with one or both of ye at a convention down the road. Cheers and cheers again. Well, no, cheers to you. Thank you very much for that. Yeah.
So that was definitely a member of Parliament, House of Lords, right? Who wrote that? I could tell from the bragging and the pint.
No, that's just standard. That's standard.
Yeah, that's standard.
Okay.
Yeah.
What a wonderful tribute to you guys. I completely agree with all of those descriptions.
Well, that's lovely. It warms the cockles, and it's nice to get that sort of appreciation. And thank you very much for following us, and we're glad you're enjoying the shows.
Indeed, and that's got to be the first in history, the first time anyone from Macclesfield has ever been referred to as erudite.
Well, the East End as well, come to that.
Yeah, there you go.
I'm erudite, aren't I? Eh?
In it.
And secondly, on our Colossus of Elorn episode, Valzane Lunovics writes on YouTube, imagine the stories he'd have written if he let himself go like this, instead of appeasing magazines and editors more often. Well, yeah, that goes back to what we were speaking about earlier, doesn't it? Unfiltered Smith, really firing on all cylinders for the Colossus. So, yeah. And again, we can only dream and sigh about the prospect of a Universal movie. But there we go. Okay, so as we say, that's the last story for season 3. However, we have got another episode or two that we're going to be putting out. We're going to be having a visit from our Auburn correspondent, Mr. Niels Hedgelin, next time. So we're going to be doing end of season wrap up, and I believe there's talk of some sort of quiz as well.
I believe so. I think we're going to be quizzed.
Smithian quiz. Yeah, I better start swatting up. There's a British term.
Yeah. I'll have to go back through my notes because I can't even remember. Things are so hectic at the minute. I can't remember what story we did last week.
David, it's been an absolute pleasure again, sir. Thanks very much for coming in.
Thank you very much. It's just such a special treat, and agreeing with the salty one. Yeah, really, I am just in deep awe of
your scholarship, your wit, insight, and your pattern recognition too, just to be able to take in all of Smith's works, but all the related works. Again, I'm just an amateur. Like I don't think I've read more than a tenth of Lovecraft's work and zero of, well, I think I've read 3 or 4 Howard stories, but just to take them all in and to relate them all, I hope you know what a great service you're doing for literature and for humankind. I really mean that.
Thank you. Yeah.
That's very kind of you to say so. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Yeah, much appreciated.
And thanks also to all our supporters, particularly our wonderful patrons, of course, who help keep the show running. We will be reading out our list of patrons next time when we do our wrap-up. But if you would like to join their merry band, then do check out our Patreon site. You get access to all our bonus content for both Strange Shadows and the Innsmouth Book Club, plus, of course, a copy of Innsmouth News. The spring edition of Innsmouth News just went out the other day, I think. So there's that to look out for. And, of course, if you are a patron, you'll get free entry to the Innsmouth Literary Festival and other events, which we're kind of toying with the idea of at the moment. Though, to be honest, the organisation... well, actually, it's not been so bad this time, has it, to be fair?
So far, so good.
So far,
so good.
I shall say, yeah, I'm not going to...
Don't jinx it. Don't jinx it.
All right. On that trepidatious note, it's goodbye from me, Rob Hoyton.
And it's goodbye from me, Tim Mendes.